Hello there, FFTCG community. I'm Judge Jared, and you are watching the second episode of Judge. And this, of course, is the series where I go over actual judge calls that I've had at events, so real-life judging situations, with the purpose of these videos being sort of, if you're a player, maybe you're just curious about what sort of judge calls happen at big events. If you're an aspiring judge, then you might wonder kind of what you're in for as far as what sort of situations might pop up as a judge at events. And if you're maybe a more experienced, more veteran judge, then it gives you an opportunity to kind of hear about and see other judge calls that have happened, hear how I handled it, and then see that perspective in terms of maybe you agree with how I handled it, maybe you would have done it differently. But I think, given the nature of a lot of judging decisions that are not straightforward, it's helpful to see somebody else's kind of thought process and what they did, and to kind of get that perspective, even if you ultimately disagree with it, just so that you can kind of maybe better understand why you think your decision was the better one and be able to kind of defend it and stuff. So I think there's kind of value across the board with talking about actual judge calls that happen at these events. Now, the first episode that I did was all about the judge calls that I handled at the Portland Materia Cup, and today what we're going to be doing is going over judge calls that I handled specifically at the Last Chance Qualifier, which just happened at the time that I'm recording this. Happened, I think about 3 weeks ago, a little less than 3 weeks ago, maybe 2 weeks ago. I don't know. Time's hard sometimes, but it's a little bit past when the LCQ happened. But I'm going to be covering actual judge calls that I had at the Last Chance Qualifier, and to be honest, there were so many at the Last Chance Qualifier that I'm not even going to fit them all into the video today. We're going to split this up. So this is part 1 of 2. You have to wait for episode 3 to get the rest of the calls from the Last Chance Qualifier. But these are all ones that I did personally handle or take part in, part of the process of handling these judge calls at the Last Chance Qualifier. Now, a couple caveats before we get started here. I'm going to present them in a simplified way. So I'm obviously not going to 100% recreate the board state for every single one of them, because most of the time all of the peripheral cards are not really important to what the overall judge call is about, and it would just take extra time getting this all set up, because as you can see, I have a whole field set up here for you to illustrate. So I got my field to kind of show an idea, a simplified version of what the board looked like for each judge call, so you can kind of get that visual factor into it of what you'd be looking at, or close approximation. So we have our 2 different sides here, our 2 players and everything. And so yeah, these are going to be simplified versions, which means that it's the crux of what the question is going to still be going to be there, still going to be accurate, but the actual details itself will vary a little bit, and obviously not all of the cards that are out here were going on during the calls. Also, there's the caveat that I'm doing this from memory. I did take notes at the time, but I'm going from memory, so I might have forgotten certain details or misremembered or wrote it down incorrectly. So if you were involved in one of these judge calls that I'm going over and you go, that's not how it happened, my apologies. This is me going off of my memory of it. And my memory of a judge call within a long weekend of lots of judge calls and things. So I think that's the caveats that I have to get out of the way here, is those things. But with that, I think we're ready to get started. So I got 10 questions, or 10 judge calls rather, to go over today. And we're going to start with the first one here. First one. So situation here is we've got our 2 players, and this player here has Kalmia out on the field. And the opponent goes ahead and they go, you know what? I'm going to cast Mist Dragon because I want to remove your break zone from the game and draw a card. And at that point, one of the players, probably the Kalmia player, goes, Judge, calls me over. And what they want to know here is they want to know if Kalmia stops Mist Dragon from removing the break zone. Now, it's important when you're doing a judge call that even if you know how the cards work, even if you have them basically memorized and you feel strongly like that you know how things work, I always like to reread the cards anyway, because sometimes maybe I'm misremembering something, or maybe there's a detail that I have memorized the card, but there's a detail that for some reason I memorized it incorrectly. So I like to look at the cards, especially when there's only a couple of them involved, just to make sure that they do what I think they do. So here with Kalmia, she has a field ability that says all cards in your break zone cannot be chosen by your opponent's summons or abilities. And then Mist Dragon, of course, has the part of its effect that says remove all the cards in your opponent's break zone from the game and draw 1 card. That's what they're trying to do here. So what's going to happen here is that the player, so looking at this, the Kalmia is not going to help. And the reason why it's not going to help is because it says all cards in your break zone cannot be chosen by your opponent's abilities or summons. And the golden rule here in this scenario is that if a card does not say the word choose, it is not choosing. And in this case, we're talking about the effect, because there are other parts of Mist Dragon that say choose. But if the effect, I should say, the effect doesn't say choose, it is not choosing. And this effect here does not say the word choose. It is indiscriminately removing all cards in the break zone from the game. So Kalmia is great for protecting against cards that say choose something in the break zone, remove it, or choose multiple things in the break zone, remove it. But Mist Dragon, because it's not choosing, it's just nuking the whole break zone, it doesn't actually stop anything there. So what's going to happen is I told them it will resolve the way that the Mist Dragon player was expecting it to. So the break zone gets removed from the game. That gets, this Mist Dragon gets used up, and the in this case the Mist Dragon player then will draw a card. So that's how that gets resolved there. And what's nice is that you never know when you have a judge call what you're getting into before you get to the table. It could be anything from a simple interaction to a really complicated rewind to a gnarly stack. You don't really know, but sometimes you get ones like this that are very straightforward. It's not that different from a question that would be asked in a rules space, whether it's on a Discord group, Facebook group, whatever. That's something that might just pop up as a question. And so that's how we got it here, and it was pretty straightforward. So not a bad way to start things off. Now the next one in this scenario, so you have the player here, they have Sid WOFF on the field, and they go ahead and they got an attacker. And so they declare their attack. They go in, the opponent says, okay, no block, take a point of damage, and take the point of damage, and ooh, we hit a Tyro here. And Tyro has the X Burst. At this point, they call me over and go, Judge. And the reason is, before the person decides whether they want to activate the X Burst on Tyro that's come up, they have a question. And the question is about Sid WOFF. Now, Sid WOFF has the text that says, when your opponent uses an X Burst, your opponent randomly discards 1 card. So it triggers off of using X Burst, makes them randomly discard a card. Cool. And then Tyro just has a search on it. Doesn't really matter what he does beyond that, but he's got a search on it. So the Tyro player is asking, in what order are these things going to resolve before he decides to do the Tyro? So he wants to know if the discard's going to happen first and then the X Burst resolves, or if the X Burst happens first and then the Sid resolves. And so the answer here that I give is that when an X Burst gets used, Sid WOFF's ability triggers immediately, but it has to wait until a player gains priority to be put on the stack. So it doesn't resolve immediately. It's got to wait for priority to happen. And X Bursts resolve immediately without using the stack. So what that means in this scenario is that the Tyro, we would have to resolve that immediately, assuming that they did use it, because as a reminder, X Bursts are optional. You do not have to use them when they pop up. So if they decided to go ahead and do the search, then they would do the search, and then following the search, then we would have the Sid WOFF go on the stack, and assuming nothing else happened, it would resolve, and then now the random discard would happen there. So again, another interaction here that was not too crazy, pretty straightforward. Just kind of getting into the timing around when cards like Sid WOFF that trigger off X Bursts, when they happen in relation to X Bursts. And of course, this interaction gets flipped around if you're doing it with something like Lunafreya or Axstar that put an X Burst effect on the stack, because since they put them on the stack, they don't resolve immediately. You end up with kind of the opposite situation there as far as what resolves first. But we're not dealing with that right now, so I won't go deep into that. All right, so that's how that one there got resolved. Popping along to the next one. All right, the next one is interesting because what happens here is here, instead of a Sid WOFF, we got the players got Lena, the Lena backup out in play. And player goes ahead and attacks. The opposite player, the opponent, says, all right, no block, taking the damage. We take the damage, and we hit an X burst. We hit, in this case, we got selfie. And they go ahead and say, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and use the selfie effect, which lets them take a fire forward from their break zone, put it back in their hand. They go, you know what, this Clive's looking pretty good. All right, cool, put the Clive back in the hand. And then they go about their turn. The player goes to main phase 2. They're kind of thinking at that point. And at this point, it's actually not the players at the table that call judge and have me come over. What happens at this point is there's a spectator that got my attention, and they kind of called me over and said, hey, you know, I just was watching over there and they forgot to resolve the Lena trigger. You know, and so they didn't stop the table, they didn't interrupt them, they just got my attention, told me, hey, I think they missed the Lena trigger. So at this point, I thank the person, but I go over to the table and I stop things at that point. I go, oh, excuse me, I'm gonna pause you here for a second. And without saying what I'm there for, without kind of getting right into the nitty gritty, I just point out like, oh, did you just take that damage a second ago? And like both players go, yeah. And we did an X burst on that, and they go, yeah, I got the Clive back, right? I go, oh, okay. Did we make sure to draw for the Lena? And then the players both go, oh no, you're right, we missed the Lena. We missed the Lena trigger. And so I just tell them, okay, well, luckily nothing else has happened. This is an easy rewind because we haven't even had any other actions yet. So let's just go ahead and resolve that with drawing a card. And they go, cool. And we draw that card there. So that's how we resolve that one. Another easy one. So that's nice. We're going to get some more complicated ones here in a second, but so far not too bad. It is worth pointing out, though, since this was brought up by a spectator, there's what the official rules say about a spectator calling a judge, and then there's kind of different people's opinions on that. The rules do say that a spectator can pause a game and get in order to get a judge. Like, they can't say anything other than just saying, oh, I'm gonna pause the game, I need to get a judge. And then they can call a judge over to handle, you know, and kind of communicate at that point what the thing is that's being missed. So as far as the rules are concerned, the floor rules, a spectator can pause a game. And that is kind of controversial for some people. I see both sides of the argument myself, but it's kind of controversial because do we really want anybody who's watching a game to have the power to pause a game and go get a judge? Like that could get messy in terms of, you know, it's great when it's legitimate, but if somebody pauses the game, you know, because they just missed something and they thought that there's something that got missed, and then we have a bunch of kind of false positives and games getting paused all over the place, or maybe there's not a judge available right away and now the players themselves don't know why are we even paused. Like there's potential for problems, and I get that side of it. In this case, it was kind of that middle ground where they didn't pause the game, but they did get my attention and I was able to get over there in time before anything else had progressed. So that part of it was nice. But yeah, the rules do officially say that a spectator can pause a game for what it's worth. Whether or not the judges at the event are going to like if you have spectators pausing the game, that's a whole other matter. But, you know, just to kind of get the concept out there in the open. All right. Now, the next one. This is our first weird one. It has nothing to do with card interactions, which is why we have no cards there. So, funny enough, this is before round one started. Everybody was seated. Everybody was getting ready to start. Everybody was excited for the day to begin. And, you know, players shuffling their decks and getting ready to go. They've already, you know, rolled off to figure who was going first and everything. And so we had a player who shuffled and their opponent cut their deck and everything, and they drew their 5 cards and did that, and they went, you know what, these are bad cards, so I'm gonna mulligan. So they went ahead and they mulliganed. They put the 5 cards on the bottom, and then maybe they were nervous, maybe they just weren't quite in their right headspace yet because the day hasn't started yet, and they put the 5 cards on the bottom, And then they picked up their deck and they started shuffling it. Now, if you haven't picked up already what the problem is here, when you mulligan, you're not supposed to shuffle. When you're mulligan, you're supposed to put the 5 cards on the bottom and then draw the next 5 from the top, and you leave it at that. So there was shuffling before the other player, or I don't know which one of the two of them caught it, but they were shuffling before one of the players caught it. And of course, the thing about shuffling is you can't undo shuffling. It's like, yeah, you can't unring a bell, right? So we now have a deck that got shuffled when it wasn't supposed to be. We haven't even started the game yet. We haven't even started the round or the tournament yet. And we have this situation that gets, so they call judge naturally, because this is a weird situation. And they go, okay, well, what do we do at this point? So the judge who takes the call comes over to me and they ask me, they give me the explanation, like, what should we do? And I'm like, that is a weird one. Now, part of the benefit of the Last Chance Qualifier and Nationals is that we have Hobby Japan right there. And in most years, like this year, we have Kageyama-san himself right there, which means that we can ask him the really tough questions. So I go, you know what? Let's take it to Kageyama. Let's go over there and let's ask him how he'd handle it. So we go over to him and we explained what the situation was and what happened. And like, and again, it's funny because we haven't started the tournament yet. Everybody's ready to start round 1 and we haven't even started yet. And we've already got a judge call. That's a weird one. So we explained to him and even he kind of goes, like, you know, he didn't say it, but there was that expression of that's weird, or that's like unfortunate, or some combination of those two. And so he's trying to figure things out. And then he asks us, he goes, okay, so the player who shuffled when they weren't supposed to, are they going first or second? And I can tell right away when he asked us this question that it sounds like what part of his solution was going to be was that if the player who had shuffled by accident was going first, part of the resolution to this situation would have been switching it up. Now the opponent, or basically the player who shuffled, would get punished and would no longer get the choice of going first or second. And then because we can't unshuffle these cards, part of the way of like rectifying it from a fairness perspective would be to let the other player get the decision if they go first or second. So we check on what the situation is. We find out that the other player who did not make the mistake, they were already going first. So we tell it to Kageyama. And again, he goes, like, okay, well, that solution's out the window. So he thinks on it a bit. And we ultimately, what he settled on for his decision was we had the player go ahead and just draw their next 5 cards. So, you know, they went ahead and with the deck the way that it is, they just drew their next 5 cards. They were not allowed to mulligan again, for sure. And they were given a warning for it. And just in case you're not familiar, kind of the main penalties that get given out are cautions and warnings. Cautions are the lighter of the two. They're kind of like, you know, lighter infractions, and then warnings are a bit more serious. And if you get multiple cautions within a tournament, then you might start seeing things get escalated to a warning. If you have multiple warnings in a tournament, you might see a warning get escalated to a game loss, which is another penalty, just less common than cautions or warnings. Game loss is what it sounds like. You just lose the match, and then that can escalate from that point. If you're really, really causing trouble, then you can get into withdrawal and disqualifications where you're actually getting pulled out of the tournament. But most of the time, the penalties that we see are cautions and warnings, and so in this case, the player got a warning for it. So they were starting off with not on the right foot as far as the kind of attention from judges was concerned. But yeah, so that's the way that Kageyama decided to handle it. And like I said, it's a weird situation, and it's one where you normally you can't undo a shuffle, right? So you have to come up with creative solutions sometimes with judge calls. And so it's good to go over these because if that sort of thing pops up, I mean, for me, I didn't have an obvious solution for it, and so I'm glad Kageyama-san was there to ask, and that's how it got resolved. All right, next up on our question. So now we have a fun one. So player has Jesse on the field, and their opponent is playing knights. So Opponent is on knights, and this player here, they go ahead and they play Cloud. And they play Cloud, and it's already basically understood because Charlotte's on the field here. She does have that field ability. It says summons and abilities of your opponent must choose Charlotte if possible. But also, I should say that he selects for the actions that he wants to do 10k to a forward, and he wants to play an avalanche from his break zone onto the field. And I don't know if he specifically said he was targeting Charlotte or if just kind of both players knew. I don't recall the detail on that one, but both players were like in agreement that like they knew that Charlotte was being targeted, whether it was specifically said or not. But then the Knights player, they go ahead and they want to use Ramza's ability here to dull 4 Knights and target Cloud to break Cloud and deal a point of damage. So they respond to Cloud's ability on the stack by doing that and targeting Cloud. And then at this point, we get Judge, and they call me over. And the reason why is because before we resolved any of this, their question is whether or not, if Cloud gets broken, if his ability is still going to resolve. And so that kind of gets into why they did this in the first place. Also, I guess the fact that, you know, the Knights player is about to lose their 4th Knight, so this was their chance to do the 4 there if they wanted to. But anyway, so they want to know if this ability is still going to resolve. And the answer, ultimately, is that yes, it is going to resolve. And this comes down to just kind of a basic fundamental thing with auto abilities, which is that when auto abilities, once they've triggered, or if they're already on the stack, they are independent of the source that they came from, meaning that they are not reliant on the source still being on the field or in whatever zone it was in order for the ability or to resolve. So in this case, that means that once Cloud has entered the field and we've triggered it, we've done the whole thing, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if he's gone when it resolves. It's the resolution doesn't ask anything about whether Cloud's there. As a side note, people may ask, because it is part of the ability, it says when he enters the field, if you control a job avalanche operative forward, then you select those options. So a lot of people, the question we've seen with this card is people will ask, well, what if the operative goes away, right? What if they had chosen instead to target Jessie, which wasn't part of this judge call, but I'm just going to cover it right here. If they had targeted Jessie and then she was gone when it resolved, that also would not stop the ability, because even though this ability is worded like a conditional auto ability, like literally the syntax or the wording of it is identical to those, it is not a conditional auto ability, and it just comes down to that when you have an effect that selects from multiple options, once the actions are selected, they're locked in regardless of what else happens. So it doesn't matter if she went away, the actions are locked in. We're not going to undo any of that. But even more so, Cloud going away doesn't change the resolution here. So yeah, so that's not going to change that. And then if you were paying attention closely, or if you're familiar with how Cloud works here, you might have noticed, and I noticed when I was at the table, when I was having them explain things to me and where we were at, he had said that he was targeting the Charlotte, or that, you know, that we were clear that they're targeting Charlotte. He did not say what the target was for Biggs. Sorry, not for Biggs. I just gave it away. Biggs is right here. He did not say what the target was for the Avalanche operative being played from the break zone. So I asked, I said, well, did we declare the target for that? And he's like, oh, no, we didn't declare that. And so we kind of got a little ahead of things there, because before this, the opponent even should have had a chance to dull their 4 and take an action. We should have already declared all targets, so the Charlotte and then the Biggs as well, because that's very relevant. You have to choose the target there. If you have multiple to choose from, it's not fair if you wait until you see when it's resolving and then go, oh yeah, it's this one. Or if they had something that can specifically remove cards in the break zone, which I guess in my current board state, because of Kalmia, that wouldn't work. But still, there's situations where it's really important to be clear there. So I asked them and said, oh no, we didn't choose a target already. So I quickly looked through their break zone, just out of curiosity, and as luck would have it, there actually was no other targets in there. So Biggs was the only one that was a target. So I let him still target the Biggs because he selected the action. They both agreed on that. It was the only legal target, so we couldn't have progressed beyond that point if it wasn't the target. But I did give him a warning for not declaring that there. And I suppose that there's an argument for maybe that it should have been a caution and not a warning, because it didn't really have like a serious effect on things. And if it popped up again now, maybe I'd only do a caution, but I felt like there needed to be some sort of penalty at least for the fact that we weren't being clear on that. And I guess it gets a little bit into like that, like Nats weekend, the level of expectation for players at Nats is very high, but the LCQ, even though it's the same room, the same location, same weekend, it's a different kind of grade of event. So maybe it should have been a caution. But what I had done at the time was I gave a warning for it, just because he didn't declare his target on that. Might have been a little too harsh. Told them that Cloud was still going to resolve as normal. So they went ahead and resolved things by first, breaking the Cloud, and then taking a point of damage. And then at that point, they resolved the Charlotte got broken and Biggs got played to the field. So that was our resolution for that particular scenario. All right, do a little bit of cleanup here. Alrighty. So our next judge call for the day. All right, so this is about our good friend Lightning. So here we had a player who cast Lightning, our lightning water elements, lightning, and targets the opposing. When you try to say opposing and opponents at the same time, you get opposing. Targets the opponent's dull forward for her ability, because her ability does say when lightning enters the field, choose one forward opponent controls, dull it, draw one card. And at this point, they've chosen the target, and then we get judge, and they call me over. And the question, of course, here, if you can't see it coming, is they're like, well, hold on. The target is already dull, right? So is it required for the target to become dull, or is it required for the target to be active in the first place for this ability? Basically, is that draw related to the status of the forward being chosen? And here, to be able to tell if it's a valid target or not, what we're looking for, of course, is the wording of, choose X, right? And here it just says choose one forward opponent controls. That's the only requirement on it. It's got to be a forward the opponent controls. It doesn't say that it has to be active. It doesn't say it has to be dull, which that would be silly if it did, but it doesn't give any sort of extra thing. It doesn't have to be a certain cost or a certain job or a certain element. It's just choose a forward opponent controls. So this forward is a valid target. The opponent controls it, and that's all that matters. Then similarly, the rest of the text, it says to dull it, and if you dull something that's already dull, then nothing really happens. And then it says draw one card. And the draw doesn't say anything on it. It doesn't say like if you do so. And even if it did, to be honest, you still would draw because you're still dulling it, even though it's already dull. But it doesn't say like, if an active target you chose became dull, draw a card or something. It doesn't have some sort of clause to it there. It's just, that's just the next part. The next action of the effect is draw a card. So you would go, all right, cool. Yeah, draw the card. So that's what I told them. I just said, hey, go ahead and draw your card there. It's a valid target, and the ability will still resolve anyway, and that was the resolution of that. So another one that is fairly straightforward as far as our answers here, but we're about to get to something that's a little bit less straightforward. All right, so here what we have an opponent that controls Siren and another forward. Here we have this Terra, who is 5k, and And what happened was, I don't remember whose turn it was. It doesn't really matter for this question. Player goes ahead and they cast Brynhildr, targeting the 5k forward. And, deals 5k, as you can see from the text here. It says choose one forward, deal at 5,000 damage. When it is put from the field in the break zone this turn, draw one card. So they go, okay, I'm targeting the Terra. And they go, all right, cool. 5,000 damage, goes in the break zone. Cool, we resolved that. And so now I draw a card, right? And so we draw the card there, and they're about to move on. And then what happens is they go, oh, wait, hold on, judge. And call me over and explain what happened. And the reason they call me over is because we missed our Siren trigger, which is the reason why Siren's up on the screen here. Siren, of course, has this auto ability that says when one or more forwards you control are chosen by your opponent's summons or abilities, you may, God, that's so small up there. I'm going to read it from the card here. You may put the top card of your deck in the break zone. If the card put in the break zone is not a forward, cancel its effects. So they go, oh, wait, the Siren trigger, we missed that. And it's not an optional trigger because it triggers when something is chosen. So we have a mandatory trigger that got missed here. And so they want to know what happens because the player already drew their card. It's already in their hand. And a lot of times it can be difficult to handle when somebody draws a card when they're not supposed to, because the first thing as a judge that you have to kind of determine, especially if something needs to go back, is if both players know exactly which card it is in the hand that was drawn. And that requires really both players to be able to agree on it and confidently agree on it. Because in this scenario here, I got 7 cards in my hand. And so do you know which card I drew? Maybe not, unless you were watching specifically when I drew it, where I put it in my hand, and if I still kept things fanned out, or, if you're one of those players that does I can't do it because I don't do it, but if you do the fast flipping, then as soon as you do that once, we don't know where that card is. It could be anything in here. It's a little bit easier if it's if it was the only card in their hand, then we know what it was. Or if they only had 2 cards in their hand, maybe it was easier to track where they put it, or if they had it down on the table. Or alternatively, if you had seen their hand earlier in the turn with Zidane or something, and then they drew and you go, oh, okay, I remember what card was in their hand or cards in their hand. And so now I know which one it was. So if both players can confidently agree, yeah, it was that card, then we can take the card that it was. My recollection off the top of my head is you reveal it to both players and you put it back on top of the deck. If you don't know, or rather if both players can't agree that they both know, so if one player wasn't paying attention, didn't notice, or if the card got shuffled from hand shuffling or whatever, and it's impossible for both players to verify, or if one player's I think it's this card, but I don't know, we don't want to be playing guessing games with this. If it's uncertain which card it is, then you as a judge would randomly choose a card from the player's hand. I believe it still gets revealed. It's in the floor rules how to handle it, but off the top of my head, I believe it still gets revealed to both players which card it is, and then it gets shuffled back into the deck. And then typically, of course, because we're having to fix things, you run into that situation where you're going to be handing out warnings or cautions. Typically, when there's a game state sort of thing that needs to be fixed like this, the guidance is that the player who, quote, caused the problem or did more to cause the problem usually gets a warning, and then the player who their opponent gets a caution, just because both players are responsible for maintaining the game state, but the player who actually did the action is still at more fault usually. But depending on the situation, maybe you give both players warnings if you see enough fault in the other side. But as a default kind of expectation, the player who caused the problem, which in this case would be the one who, actually, no, in this case, it could be hard to put the blame, because the Brynhildr player, it's not necessarily their fault that they drew. It's the other player, the Siren player, forgot their own trigger, right? So, yeah, I don't remember off the top of my head. I think I gave them both warnings, to be honest, on this one. But anyway, So we have this mandatory trigger and we go, how do we resolve this? And I'll tell you what I did, but then I'm going to tell you what I think about my choice now afterward with more time to think on it. So what I did at the time was I went, okay, it is a mandatory trigger. And if this effect gets canceled, we can easily put the card back on the field. But I guess as a side note, this Terra has a, when it goes to the break zone, do something. This wasn't the card on the field. I just picked it out. So for the sake of being accurate here, there should have been a trigger when she went to the break zone, but it's not important for the story because she wasn't the card that was actually used here. She's just here to be a 5k forward. But anyway, so it would be easy to return this to the field, but the getting rid of the card in the hand would be harder. And the players, they couldn't agree, or at least they both weren't. Well, the player who drew the card probably knows what card it is, right? But the opponent wasn't sure. We didn't have agreement there. So I went, well, it's a mandatory trigger. We got to resolve it. Or that's the best way to fix the game state, is to resolve it. So I said, you know what we're going to do is, before I do anything with the card that's in hand, we don't know if that's actually relevant. Because maybe Siren doesn't cancel, because it only cancels if you flip over a card and it's not a forward. So I go, okay, well, you know what? It's one step at a time. We're going to resolve the Siren trigger. The player wanted to flip the card. We go, okay, let's see what happens. So we resolve the Siren trigger. We flip the card, and lo and behold, it's a forward. So we go, oh, okay. Whew, things just got easier. It got easier because now Siren did not cancel. So, okay, cool. Didn't cancel. Forward still got broken. We still drew the card. Hooray, we did it. We resolved the Siren trigger and didn't actually have to rewind anything else ultimately, or have to deal with the extra card in hand. And like I said, I think I gave excuse me, warnings to both players. Now, that being said, thinking on it since then, the thing that I probably should have done if it popped up again now, the same exact situation, the way I would handle it differently is I probably would still treat it actually just as a missed trigger. The reason why is because I did get caught up in my head with the fact that the Siren itself is a mandatory trigger. It does go on the stack. And that's important, by the way, for things like Amaterasu, right? Is that even if the Siren player was not intending to flip the card over, the auto ability, when there's something gets chosen, it still triggers and it still goes on the stack, and it can still be interacted with something like Amaterasu. So even if the Siren player doesn't want it to, it's going to go on the stack. That part of it is mandatory. However, the wording on it is that when you go to resolve it, it says you may put the top card of your deck into the break zone. That part is optional. So the trigger itself, not optional, but whether you flip the card or not, that is optional. So if the same thing happened now, the way that I would probably resolve it is I would say that it's a missed trigger, in the sense that, like, we'll say that it triggered. There was no response to that trigger on the stack, but we're going to say that it basically forcing the person that's the Siren player to have chosen to not do that. And it's kind of the punishment for them not paying attention to their own card, basically, right? Not realizing until afterward. So that would have been sufficient. In that case, because of the resolution of things, maybe I would have given cautions to both sides. I'd actually maybe a caution to the Brynhildr player, and then for the other player, depending on how I felt, maybe still a warning, maybe downgrade it to a caution, not sure. So yeah, that's how I'd handle it now. And I highlight this to point out that it can be tough when you're doing a judge call, because again, you don't know until you go up to the table what it is that you're going to be asked, what's going on. It's a black box till you get there, and it could be something easy and it could be something hard, or anywhere in between. And for things like this, where it's not about card interactions, it's about fixing a mistake, those require the most kind of judgment on, pun fully intended there, the most judgment in terms of like how we're going to fix things, because we can't fully fix them. We can't fix it in a way that's going to like undo everything. If we can undo everything and just like rewind a couple steps, like with the Lena, where it was just easy to go, okay, just draw your card. Hooray, that's easy. When we start having things we can't undo, like shuffling your deck when you're not supposed to, or like having a card in your hand that maybe now we're going to have to put back, that gets tough. And so as a judge, you're having to, in the moment, like, you don't have infinite time to go either look up solutions or to think through it or to ask a bunch of people or whatever. You have to come up with a solution in the moment. And so in my case, what happened here was I got a little bit too caught up on the trigger itself is mandatory. So I was thinking to myself, the whole thing is mandatory. But in hindsight, thinking about the fact that the flip itself is not mandatory, it actually would have been easier to resolve, I think, in a way that just would less of a headache. And so, yeah, just, I wanted to share that because I don't just want to say, here's how you handle it, right? But just point out that, even for me, there are things where afterwards I go, you know what, I could have handled that differently, or maybe that was not the best solution to it. I should keep certain things in mind and stuff. And, everybody's fallible. Everybody learns from things. So, yeah, that's how I resolved it. But that's also how I would resolve it now if it were to happen again. All right. Next up. Okay, so what happened here? We've got the opponent goes ahead and they cast Lightning, our good friend Lightning. And then they move to attack. Okay, attack with Lightning. And of course, she has this ability. When she attacks, you can play a 13 forward of cost 4 or less, I think, from your hand onto the field. You play it dull, it's party attacking, yada yada. And so go ahead and play the Sarah here. They're party attacking. The Sarah itself is not important. There's no targets or anything for her ability. But of course, Lightning has this field ability that says when Lightning forming a party deals damage to the opponent, the damage becomes 2 instead. So Lightning attacked. We played the Sarah. They're party attacking. The opponent goes, all right, no blocks. I'm going to take damage. So they need to take 2 damage, right? So they flip over the first damage, and they go, oh, well, that's an X burst right there. So at this point, we go, Judge. And the reason why is because we've hit an X burst. And so now the question is, how do we proceed at this point? Because we all know that X bursts don't use the stack. They get resolved immediately. So now we have a bit of like 2 things that we're not sure what the order is. They're wondering, well, do we flip over the other point of damage and then start resolving X bursts? Do we stop right now, resolve this X burst, and then flip over the next point of damage? And then what happens if we have multiple X bursts that pop up and we haven't resolved any yet? So the first thing to know is that when we have multiple damage, player damage, happening at the same time, we flip over all damage, we resolve all damage first before any X bursts happen. So we did hit this for damage, but we just go, cool, there's an X burst there. And then after that, we take the second damage. And lo and behold, oh, well, another X burst. We had Yuna and now Star Sybil. So you do take all damage first before any X bursts possibly trigger. Now we have 2 of them. So the question here is this like auto abilities where they both are getting used and then the player gets to like decide what order to resolve them in? Do we resolve them in the order that they were flipped in? Do we resolve it backwards? Do we go from whatever the most recent one flipped is and then work our way back and kind of catch up? And so luckily this is pretty straightforward. The way it works is that we resolve the X bursts in the order that they were flipped, right? So the kind of 2 steps to this is that first we took all the damage, and then we go in order down the cards and go X burst, whatever, which ones came up, we resolve them in that order. So the Yuna, we would go, okay, we're going to resolve the Yuna first. We're going to return the Lightning to hand. Cool. Lightning goes back to hand. And then we're going to resolve the Star Sybil and go ahead and do a search. So that's how that would be resolved there. Now, the thing about Lightning is she likes to return. And so your eyes are not fooling you. Our next question is also about Lightning. So very similar situation. We have now Lightning on the field, and we got Sarah, and player here is at 6 points of damage, and the Lightning player goes, okay, you know what? We're going to party attack. Not going to play anything from hand. We're just going to party attack with Lightning coming in, and opponent's like, well, I got nothing. All right, I got to take damage. And so they flip over their damage, and now they're at 7 damage. So there's an immediate question here, which is that everybody knows at 7 points of damage in standard constructed, you lose, right? So once you hit 7 points of damage, you lose. But lightning is supposed to deal 2 points of damage. So the first question that pops up here is, well, do we deal that 8th point of damage, or do we just go, oh, we hit 7 and we stop? The answer here is that a player doesn't actually lose the game until rule processes get checked to see if one of those losing conditions happened, which of course is like if you needed to draw a card from your deck and you couldn't, then you lose. If you need to take a point of damage from your deck and you couldn't, you lose. And if you've taken at least 7 points of damage, you lose. So those things get checked when brain here, when a player gets priority, and there's some other times too, but typically there. So we still have to resolve all this damage is what I'm getting at. Just like we did with the X bursts, we have to resolve all the damage first. So we actually do take another point of damage here, and now we're at 8 points of damage. So you would think, okay, well, that's the end there. We took 8 points of damage and we lost. But it's not the end, because this is actually the point at which they go, judge, because they're filling out the match slip. And the question that comes up is, what do we write on the match slip? Because if you've played an event, you know that in a match slip, you have to write down how much damage each player received. And you're like, well, there's 8 damage here. I took 8 damage. I went from 6 to 8 in that last attack. So how much damage do we write down? Do we write down 8 because that's how much we took? Do we write down 7 because it was at the point that we hit 7 that we lost? Like, does it matter? And this was a really interesting situation because off the top of my head, when it came up, when it was brought to my attention, I was like, I don't remember, because I've seen it. I remember that I've seen it like go back and forth, or that like, I felt like I knew both answers being true at different points in time. So again, we go to Kageyama-san because he's right there and perfect person to just go and check with. And so we go and ask him, and my inkling, actually, no, I'm sorry. My memory of this is a little bit fuzzier. So what happened was I got called over to the table and I said, oh, you write down just 7 because you're supposed to write down however much damage actually it was required for you to lose. And then you don't write down the 8th one. So I was confident in that, actually, now that my memory is returning to me. So I got, oh, it's 7. And the player themselves who took the 8 damage, they were like, can I appeal that? And I said, yeah, you can appeal that. So I appealed that. And if you're not familiar, of course, whenever there's a ruling from a floor judge at an event, you have the right as a player to appeal that ruling if you disagree with it. And so that in that case, it will get escalated to the head judge. And then once the head judge makes their determination, then then you're done. That's the final, whatever it is, whatever the head judge says, it's over at that point. We are doing what the answer was, and then we're moving on. And so we take this to Kageyama-san and explain the situation. We go, okay, lightning attacked, dealt 2 points of damage. We're writing this down on the slip. Do we write down 8 points of damage, or do we write down 7 points of damage? And Kageyama-san comes back with, write down the 8. They dealt 8 points of damage, so write down the 8. And what's interesting is if you've been watching my Rules Roundup videos, there was actually a while back, there was a question where I talked about this very thing. I talked about what we're supposed to write on the slip versus what's actually down there. And at the time in that video, I said, oh, you're supposed to write the actual damage that you took. So those of you who've been watching a while and remember that, seeing me now saying, oh, it's supposed to be 7, are like, hold on, you told me something completely different. And the reason why there's a difference there is because at some point after that video, and I've been meaning to correct this, so this is my belated correction for that thing in the video. I looked into the floor rules. I don't remember why. I looked into the floor rules about this with writing down damage, and I saw that there actually was an update, because whenever they update things, they put the newest updates in red text to show you here's the changes in the document, right? And there was an update from last year where they changed the rule on that. They changed the rule so that instead of writing down what the actual damage was you took, the rule that they changed it to was, oh, you write down whatever the minimum damage required was in order for the opponent to win. So if it was in limited, if they took more than 6 damage, you would just write down 6. If it was in standard or title or L3, then you would write down 7, even if they took more damage. So since I had seen that and I had that question pop up a few months ago, that's why I went, oh yeah, very confidently it's going to be 7 points, even though you took 8 for recording purposes on the match slip and in the software, it's going to be 7. So they appealed it, and Kageyama then says, oh no, you write down 8. They dealt 8, so write down 8. And I was about ready to let it go, to be honest, because I'm like, well, it appealed to him, or it was appealed to him, and he said do the opposite. So if Kageyama says it, then that's what it is. And then I realized that they actually had a copy. Square had a copy of the printed floor rules right next to us on the table there. They had printed them out, so we had them for reference. And I was like, hey, hold on. So I go ahead and I flip to the page that I know it's on, and I then start explaining to Kageyama-san via the translator who's there, because his English is actually better than you might think, but for certain things you need a little bit of extra help there. And I'm like pointing to the paragraph that I knew was in there in the red and like underlining things, and he's nodding along and everything, and having the translator kind of help with things. And he goes, oh, okay, yeah. He goes, write down 7. But I'm going to have to talk to the team about that. Have to go back to the team and talk to them about that. So it was really funny because even for Kageyama-san, he was like, this is what the answer is. This is how the rule goes. And then I went, wait, no, I actually have it written down that you do the opposite. And then he's like, oh, you know what? You were absolutely right. And so I don't know if there was a problem there in terms of what they intended versus what ended up on the paper, and that's why he needed to talk to them, or maybe there was just uncertainty or something. But you know what? Honestly, it makes me feel a little bit better that I messed that up in the Rules Roundup video, because if Kageyama-san messed it up too, then a little bit of weight off of me. So I apologize for having messed up that mistake, or messed up that answer before on this, but at least now on the record I can point out to you that if you take more damage than is required to win, you actually only mark down on the slip 7 points of damage. So long-winded little story there, but just giving you a little kind of behind the scenes, a little insight into the goings on at the LCQ and Nats here. All right, we are down to our last question now. And the last question is an interesting one. It's not going to involve the field at all. This is a question that came up in between rounds. It was after round 2, or rather it was towards the end of round 2. We had a couple games still finishing up, but the player who came up to me was after their round 2 was complete. And they come up to me and they go, hey, I need to talk to you because I realized that, so I made sure to match my my physical deck to my deck list, which by the way is always a good thing to ensure before you play an event. Make sure that those two match up. Make sure to match it up there. But the player realized when looking at it between rounds, I guess, or something, that the deck list that he matched up his deck to has 49 cards in the main deck. And that's a problem, right? Because a legal deck is 50 cards, not 49, not 51, 50 cards. So the problem here is they are playing with a 49 card deck for the first 2 rounds. To their credit, they came up of their own volition to say, hey, I've got a problem here. We need to fix this, or how do we fix this, right? So I'm absolutely going to give credit to them because that was the right thing to do. It would have been much more of a problem if it came up later in the day, because there was 7 rounds for that one. So big difference coming up on after round 2 to say, oh, I made this mistake, versus to come up in round 6 when you're already like 5-1 or something, or after round 6, and go, oh, whoops. So we go, you know what, let's check this, because the player, he's like, this is what I'm fairly certain this is what it is. I find his deck list, we go and look at it, we pull it out, and sure enough, because these deck lists are the ones that have the 50 slots for the main deck, sure enough, that 50th slot, empty. Um, so we go, all right, well, the deck list is definitely incorrect. So we even if everything else was fine, we still have a problem there that is going to have to be rectified. But we go, all right, let's see how many cards are in the deck. So they handed me the deck, and I count through it, and I get all the way through, and I think I even double checked maybe. And sure enough, 49 cards. So the good and bad news was that their deck matched their deck list, but both of them illegal. So this was the other time that we talked to Kageyama-san about things and went, well, how do we want to fix this? Because the thing about deck list errors is they are very black and white. If your deck list does not 100% match your deck, that's pretty much guaranteed at minimum a game loss for you. And then it would be a game loss followed by making sure that they match moving forward and figuring out what the mistake was. Like, is it that the deck list is incorrect and the deck, and we're gonna match to what's in the deck, or technically you could do it the other way around, but really you want it to be that whatever their deck there is that they're playing with, that they've used so far, that should be what we want to go with, and we need to match the deck list to whatever the deck is they're physically have been using. So yeah, it's usually a game loss at minimum, unless things are really egregious. And yeah, because you can't get away with anything less than that for a deck being, for there being a deck list discrepancy, basically. But here, they both match, but we're missing the 50th card. And so we're like, well, how do we handle this, right? Because in the long past, like the first couple years of the game, there used to be a thing of like, oh, if there was some sort of deck list error thing and we needed to fix it, the solution at the time was like fill the missing spots or whatever with summoners or evokers, which are of course the generic 1 CP backups that have no text on them, and so you just would take whatever like the appropriate element was and just shove those in there. People don't typically carry those around with them, not even the staff, so it's not really a solution that you see. I don't even know if I really saw it get used back in the day, but that was always what kind of made the rounds as the solution for things. So we bring it up to Kageyama-san, we explain it to him, and his question to the player, because we're all talking together at this point, is, okay, well, what's the 50th card that was missing? And the 50th card is this Alchemist that I've showed you down below, because they said, well, there was one in the deck already, and there's supposed to be a second copy. And they had the card on them. They had that Alchemist on them. So they're like, oh yeah. And Kageyama-san's like, all right, show me what's the card that's missing, And then they go, okay, that's the Alchemist. That's the card that we're missing here. And so he looks at it and he goes, all right, what we're gonna do is we're gonna mark down on the deck sheet. We're gonna write that this second copy of Alchemist in here. And by the way, bonus behind the scenes thing here, it was a 12 deck, which I happen to have a 12 deck here for accuracy, but yeah, it was a 12 deck. So they Kageyama-san said, all right, put the second Alchemist in there, we're going to correct the sheet. At that point the player was 1-1 after their first 2 rounds, and Kageyama-san, all right, Kageyama-san said, we're going to give him a game loss for round 3, because we were about to start round 3 after the last couple of games wrapped up. So he said, okay, we're going to go ahead and give a game loss. So what we did was we just informed him, all right, you're go ahead and still go sit at your next match, that comes up when we do the pairings. Go sit there, and then we'll have a judge come over before the round starts to explain to your opponent that they're getting the win for the round. Just kind of automatically, it's at that point it's considered a 7-0 win for the player who did not get the game loss. And that's how it got resolved. Now, I'm going to take a brief moment here to point out that the overall judging philosophy by Hobby Japan in this game is known for being pretty lenient compared to other card games. I personally don't have experience judging or playing in competitive events outside of FFTCG, but after talking with several people who have, it is very lenient compared to other games. So other games, if you had a 49 card deck list, they might have just straight up DQ'd you at that point. They went, you know what, you're done. You played with an illegal deck list and you're done at that point. So some of you might be like, oh, that seems pretty light to just let him put the card back in and like just conveniently, oh, this is what the card was supposed to be, haha, right? But I think it's important to understand what Hobby Japan's judging philosophy is, because whether you agree with it or not, if you're judging an event, you should at least be aware of, cognizant of, and for the most part respect what Hobby Japan's like how they would judge things, how they would want things to be judged. We don't have an official judge program, which is a whole thing in itself, but there's the way that we kind of expect things to be judged because of the precedent that's been set for the last 9 years of this game. And so yeah, there's certain things, like I said, the deck list error, there definitely needs to be a game loss in there. There's no getting around that. But certain things like this, if you come from a background in a different game, you might be surprised that they just went, okay, we'll give you game loss and we'll fix the deck and move on. But that was the solution there. And that's, again, part of the reason for doing these sorts of videos, is to kind of show you just behind the scenes, looking at how various situations get resolved. And this is a weird one. So yeah, at the beginning of the next round, we went over to the table, informed the opponent that they got a 7-0 win for the round. And actually what's interesting is that the two players themselves just agreed to play a one for fun anyway for that round. So instead of kind of getting up and going, all right, well, we're done, they both, I think the one who got the game lost was like, hey, do you still want to play? And the opponent was like, yeah, sure. And so they still played it out. I don't know who won that game. I should have checked afterward out of curiosity. But yeah, so anyway, that was my final one for today, for part 1 of the LCQ judge call questions, or episode 2 of Judge. And so yeah, I hope that was helpful for you. Again, there's a lot of things in here where it came down to certain decisions on my part that are not clear cut or obvious. And so, maybe you agree with my choices, maybe not. But some of them were card interactions. That's straightforward. There's no arguing that. But some of the ones that are a little bit more wishy-washy on how you handle it, like I said, even if you disagree with me, just kind of being aware of another perspective or another solution, whether it's not the one that you would do, is helpful. I will eventually be doing the video of the rest of the ones from the Last Chance Qualifier, so you can keep an eye out for that. And if you made it this far into the video, a quick reminder that the same day that this is releasing, at 11 p.m. Pacific, 2 a.m. Eastern, I'm going to be doing the Judge workshop live stream with Yo Caesar. We're going to be talking about all sorts of judging stuff, from getting into judging to judging your first event to, leveling up as a judge, as it were, in terms of, not literally because there's no judge program, but like, moving up to bigger events or to head judging, things like that. And it should be a great discussion, and I highly suggest checking it out. It is super late because Yo is in Scotland and I'm not, and I have small children that I have to work around their schedule and making sure they're asleep and everything. So if you can't catch it live, the VOD will be there. It's over on Yo's channel, which I believe is called the Rules. It's either Rules Processing or Rules Progressing. I don't remember, but yeah, it should be a great conversation. And if you're watching this video after when it released, whether it's a day, a week, a month, a year, 3 years afterward, if you're watching it then you should go back and find that video and watch it, because it was a great conversation. And if you're wondering, how do I know there was a great conversation? Time travel. What can I say? But yeah, it'll be fun, or it was fun, depending on when you're watching this. And I think very illuminating, especially because Yo has just a endless font of judging experience. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope that it was informative and that you enjoyed the little stories behind things and stuff. Thank you so much for watching. You can find me in the normal places on Facebook, where I'm at Judge Jared FFTCG, I think there, or no, maybe just, yeah. And then I don't have my little graphic to help me out this time. YouTube, I'm definitely at Judge Jared, and then Twitter is at Judge Jared FFTCG, and then on Discord, I know I'm definitely, my username is Judge Jared on Discord. So you can find me in those places. Yeah. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Judge Jared, and until next time, court is adjourned.